Daniel was a human explorer on a faraway world. His mission was simple in writing but hard in practice. He was sent to map and study a planet that was rich with life but not yet settled. Humanity had spread far among the stars, building colonies and trading with new allies, but many places still waited to be discovered. Daniel loved this kind of work because it mixed danger with wonder. Every day he walked into the unknown, never sure what he would find. The world he studied was covered in forests that seemed alive in more ways than one. The trees were tall and strong with wide roots that spread across the soil like veins. The air was thick with the scent of strange flowers. During the day, the sky was painted in shifting colors, and at night the plants gave off a soft light, making the ground glow. It was beautiful but also dangerous. Strange sounds echoed from the woods, and sometimes Daniel caught sight of creatures moving in the distance. He was careful and alert, for he knew a single mistake could cost him his life. On one quiet evening, while the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the land, Daniel set up camp near a small stream. He lit a controlled fire for warmth and cooked his rations. His scanner showed no signs of large predators nearby, so he let his guard relax just a little. Yet his ears picked up something unusual. It was a faint sound, almost like a cry carried through the trees. Daniel frowned and turned his head. He thought at first it was the wind, but it came again, soft and broken, as if someone was hurt. He grabbed his gear and followed the sound, moving carefully among the roots and rocks. The deeper he went, the more certain he became that it was not his imagination. Someone or something was in pain. Daniel finally pushed aside a thick curtain of vines and froze. Lying on the ground near a fallen log was a figure unlike any he had seen before. It was a girl, clearly not human, yet her form was close enough that Daniel understood her right away. Her skin carried natural patterns, almost like the markings of leaves or branches, and her eyes glimmered faintly even in the dim light. She was young, and her breathing was shallow. A wound marked her side, nothing instantly fatal but enough to leave her weak. Her clothes were torn, simple garments made from woven plant fibers. She looked frightened when she noticed him, but she was too weak to move away. Daniel's first thought was caution. He did not know her species, her culture, or her people. For all he knew, she might belong to a tribe that disliked outsiders. But then he saw the fear in her eyes mixed with pain, and all doubt left his heart. She was hurt and she needed help. Slowly, Daniel knelt down and kept his hands open to show he meant no harm. He spoke gently, though he knew she would not understand his words. "It's all right. I won't hurt you. Let me help." His voice was calm, steady, and warm. The girl blinked at him, confused but not resisting. Daniel carefully reached into his pack and pulled out a small medical kit. He showed her the bandage roll and the antiseptic spray, hoping she would see it was for healing. Her eyes followed his every move. With steady hands, he cleaned the wound and covered it, working as gently as possible. The girl hissed softly at the sting, but she did not push him away. When he finished, he gave her some water from his flask. She sipped slowly, still watching him with wide eyes. For a moment there was silence. The forest noises faded into the background. Two beings from different worlds sat together, bound by one simple truth. One was hurt, and the other chose to care. Daniel smiled faintly. "You'll be all right. Just need some rest." He knew she could not understand, but the tone carried meaning. She tilted her head as if listening to the sound of kindness more than the words. The evening grew darker, and Daniel realized he could not leave her here. The forest was alive with predators. Already he could hear distant roars, low and hungry. He decided to bring her back to his camp where the fire would keep most creatures away. At first she tensed when he tried to lift her, but when she saw he was careful and not rough, she let him carry her. Back at the camp, Daniel laid her down on a soft bedroll and added more wood to the fire. The light flickered across her features, revealing more of her strange beauty. She had a soft, natural beauty that seemed untouched by cruelty or war. Even in weakness, there was a quiet strength in her eyes. Daniel found himself wondering about her people. Did they live close by? Were they peaceful? Did they know of humans? He had no answers, only questions. As the night deepened, the girl stirred now and then, sometimes whispering words in her own language. Daniel could not understand, but he listened anyway. He kept watch, scanning the forest for signs of movement. Once he thought he saw glowing eyes beyond the trees, but when he raised his weapon, the presence faded. Still, he knew danger was never far, Hours passed slowly. At last, the girl opened her eyes fully and looked at him with clearer vision. She studied him, then placed her hand lightly on her bandaged side. She seemed to realize what he had done. Her lips moved, forming words he did not know, but the tone was soft, almost grateful. Daniel gave her a nod, smiling again. "You're welcome." For the first time, her expression eased. The fear in her gaze lessened, replaced by curiosity. She looked at him not as a stranger, but as something different, someone who had chosen to help when he did not need to. Daniel leaned back, staring up at the strange sky where twin moons rose together. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. He knew that saving her might change his mission, perhaps even his life. But in that quiet moment, he did not care about orders or reports. He only cared that she was safe for the night. The forest around them sang with strange voices, but inside the circle of firelight there was peace. A human explorer and an alien girl sat close, connected by an unspoken bond that was stronger than language. And though neither of them knew it yet, this meeting would shape the days to come in ways neither could imagine. The next morning, the forest was alive with sound. Strange birds with bright wings flew through the trees, filling the air with music that was sharp and haunting. Small creatures climbed the branches above, chattering as they leapt from one vine to another. Daniel woke early as he always did, but this time his first thought was not of mapping the land or checking his scanner. His first thought was of the alien girl lying beside the fire. She was still weak, but the color had returned to her face. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked around with more strength than the night before. When she saw Daniel, she did not flinch as she had the first time. Instead, she simply watched him as if trying to understand who he was and why he had chosen to help her. Daniel gave her a small smile and offered her a ration bar and water. She accepted the water, though she wrinkled her nose at the ration. He could not blame her. It was bland and dry even to a human. As she drank, Daniel thought of the sound he had heard the night before. That roar had been no ordinary animal. It carried a power that did not belong to small predators. Something large had been following them, and he knew it would return. He needed to stay alert because this forest was not his world. The rules of survival here were written by the creatures that had lived on it for ages. The girl tried to speak, pointing toward the trees. Her words were soft and unfamiliar, but Daniel could sense her meaning. She was warning him. Whatever had hurt her was still out there. He nodded, showing her he understood. He pulled out his scanner and swept the area. The small device blinked, then showed faint readings of movement. Something was circling at the edge of range, too far to see, but close enough to worry. Daniel set his mind to work. He gathered branches, stones, and vines, creating simple traps that would slow down anything charging into camp. He sharpened a few sticks into spears and placed them in the ground at angles. He even tied small alarms made of metal scraps to alert him if something pushed through the bushes. The girl watched him work with wide eyes. At first she looked uncertain, but when she saw how carefully he planned every move, her fear gave way to wonder. By evening, the forest grew heavy with silence. The usual noise of animals faded. Daniel knew this was a bad sign. Predators often silence the woods around them. He kept the fire low so it would not give away their position, and he sat ready with his weapon. The girl stayed close, clutching the blanket he had given her. She did not speak, but her eyes never left the dark line of trees. Then it came. A roar shook the night, closer now, deep and violent. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath them. Daniel rose to his feet, weapon ready. His traps were set, but he doubted they would be enough to stop whatever beast hunted them. His heart pounded, yet his mind was clear. He would protect her no matter what came from the dark. The first sign of the predator was a flash of glowing eyes. 2 circles of light moved between the trees, slow and deliberate. Then a massive shape stepped into view. It was unlike any creature Daniel had seen before. Its body was covered in thick scales that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. It stood on 4 strong legs, its shoulders rising higher than Daniel's head. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and its roar shook the fire into sparks. The girl gasped and pressed against the ground in fear. Daniel raised his weapon and fired a warning shot. The blast struck the ground in front of the beast, sending dirt flying. But instead of retreating, the creature charged. The earth shook as it rushed forward, faster than something so large should have been able to move. Daniel shouted to the girl to stay back, though she could not understand the words. He triggered the first trap. A vine pulled tight, snapping up a row of sharpened sticks. The beast stumbled but did not fall. It roared again and smashed through the barrier. The alarm bells clanged, filling the night with metallic echoes. Daniel fired again, aiming for its side. The shot burned against its scales, making it howl in pain, but still it pressed on. When it leapt, Daniel rolled aside, landing near the girl. The predator's claws tore into the earth where he had stood. Dust and sparks filled the air. Desperate, Daniel grabbed one of the spears and thrust it forward as the creature lunged again. The sharpened point struck between its scales, drawing a cry of rage. The beast staggered, shaking its massive head. Daniel pressed the attack, striking again and again. He knew he could not kill it easily, but he could drive it back. The girl, though trembling, suddenly moved. She picked up a fallen stone and threw it with surprising force, striking the beast's eye. It howled and turned toward her. Daniel shouted and leapt in its path, slamming another spear into its chest. The predator snapped its jaws at him, teeth closing inches from his arm. He shoved back with all his strength, using the fire as cover. Flames licked the beast's face, and with a final roar it pulled away. The predator retreated into the forest, vanishing as suddenly as it had come. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of fire. Daniel stood breathing hard, sweat on his face, his hands shaking from the fight. He looked at the girl. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her chest rising and falling quickly. Then slowly she lowered her hands and let out a soft sound that seemed like relief. Daniel sank down beside the fire, his body aching. He knew the danger was not over. The predator might return, or there could be more. But for now they had survived. He looked at the girl and gave a tired smile. "We made it," he whispered, though she could not understand. The way she looked at him told him she did not need to. She understood something deeper than words. For the rest of the night, Daniel stayed awake, repairing traps and keeping the fire alive. The girl finally slept, her breathing steady and calm. Each time he glanced at her, he felt a strange weight in his chest. She was not just a stranger now. She was someone who trusted him, someone he had chosen to protect. When dawn came, light spread across the forest, painting the leaves in gold. Daniel felt exhaustion, but also a spark of pride. He had faced a creature that should have ended him, and he had stood his ground. Humanity was small compared to the vastness of the galaxy, yet moments like this showed why they endured. Courage was their weapon, and compassion was their strength. As the girl, the days after the battle with the predator moved slowly but carried a heavy meaning for Daniel. The forest no longer felt the same. Every sound made him think of danger, and every shadow reminded him of the glowing eyes that had attacked them. But there was also something new. The alien girl no longer looked at him with fear. She stayed close, watching his movements, copying some of the things he did as if she was trying to understand him more. Daniel spent his time repairing equipment, adjusting traps, and exploring small sections of the forest. He never wandered too far because he did not want to leave the girl unprotected. She followed him whenever she could walk, leaning on a staff he had carved for her. Her wound healed faster than he expected, and each day she grew stronger. Sometimes she spoke to him in her own language, pointing to plants or animals, teaching him simple words. He could not say them well, but she laughed softly at his attempts. That laughter, even though brief, gave Daniel a sense of peace that the wild forest had not given him since his arrival. On the fourth day, something changed. When Daniel woke, the girl was gone. His heart jumped. He searched the camp quickly, thinking she might have gone to fetch water from the stream, but she was not there. Panic rose in him. The forest was no place for her to be alone, not with predators stalking at every turn. He grabbed his gear and followed the faint track she left behind. His mind filled with questions. Why had she left without a word? Was she taken? Was she trying to go back to her people? The tracks led him deeper into the forest. Hours passed as he pushed through heavy vines and crossed streams, his eyes fixed on the ground. The sounds of the wild echoed all around him, but he ignored them. His only thought was finding her. Finally, as the sun dipped lower, he saw movement ahead. He crouched low, gripping his weapon until he realized what he was looking at. The girl was there, but she was not alone. Around her stood a group of women who looked much like her. Their skin carried the same natural patterns. Their eyes glimmered with the same soft light, and their clothes were woven from living fibers of the forest. They moved with grace, and though they carried no heavy weapons, each one held a spear or staff that showed they were not defenseless. Daniel froze, unsure of what to do. The girl saw him and raised her hand, speaking quickly to the women. They turned their eyes toward him, studying him with caution. None of them attacked, but none of them lowered their weapons either. It was clear they were trying to decide who this strange human was and what place he had with the girl they knew. Daniel slowly stepped out from the brush, keeping his hands open to show he meant no harm. The women spread out slightly, forming a half circle around him. The girl spoke again, pointing to her bandaged side, then pointing at him. Her tone was urgent but not fearful. Daniel realized she was explaining what he had done, how he had saved her when she was injured. The women exchanged glances. Their expressions softened a little, but they did not move closer. One who seemed older, perhaps a leader among them, stepped forward. She was tall, her markings more vivid than the others, and her eyes held a wisdom born from experience. She looked at Daniel as if weighing his soul. She spoke a few words, then waited. Daniel could not understand, but the tone told him it was a question. He placed a hand on his chest and said his name slowly. Daniel. Then he pointed at the girl and motioned gently toward her healed wound. Safe now. She is safe. His words were simple, but he hoped his meaning carried through his actions. The leader studied him for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod and signaled to the others. The tension in the air softened, though the circle around him did not break. The girl smiled faintly, relief in her eyes. Daniel felt his heart slow down. He was no longer alone with her. Now he stood before her people, and their judgment would decide what happened next. The women gestured for him to follow. Daniel hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward. He realized they were not hostile, but they were not yet friends either. Trust was something that had to be earned. They led him deeper into the forest, moving with a grace that made him realize how much they belonged to this place. They avoided roots without looking, crossed streams without stumbling, and moved silently as if the forest itself welcomed them. After hours of travel, they reached a hidden settlement. Daniel's eyes widened as he saw it. Homes were shaped from living trees, branches woven into walls that glowed with natural light. Pathways were lined with flowers that shimmered in the dusk. The settlement was alive, breathing with nature rather than fighting against it. It was unlike any human colony he had ever seen. Children ran to greet the women, but when they saw Daniel, they stopped and stared. Curiosity shone in their faces, but also caution. Some of the older members of the tribe came forward, whispering as they looked at the strange man in their midst. Daniel felt their eyes on him, heavy with judgment. He knew he stood on the edge of something important. The girl spoke quickly to her people, pointing again to her side, then to Daniel. Her words carried urgency, her hands moving with emotion. The crowd murmured. Some faces softened, others remained hard. At last, the older woman, the leader who had judged him earlier, raised her hand. The crowd fell silent. She stepped forward, looking at Daniel once more. Then she spoke slowly, clearly, as if testing whether he might understand at least the shape of her language. Daniel listened carefully, but could not grasp the meaning. Still, he bowed his head slightly, showing respect. Respect was something all beings understood. The leader studied him, then gave a short command. The tension in the air broke. The crowd began to disperse, though many still glanced back at him with curiosity. The girl stepped closer to Daniel, smiling faintly. She touched her chest and said her name softly, a word that sounded like Elira. Daniel repeated it, though clumsily, and she laughed. Then she pointed to him and said, Daniel, as if teaching her people the name of the human who had saved her. Murmurs spread among the tribe as they repeated his name. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift. He was no longer just a stranger. He was someone they now knew, even if only by name. The night came, and he was given a place near the fire in their settlement. The tribe kept their distance, but no one pushed him away. Elira sat beside him, her eyes bright with trust. As Daniel watched the glowing trees and listened to the quiet songs of the tribe, he realized how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had come to this world as a lone explorer, but now he was part of something greater. He had saved one life, and in return he had been brought before an entire tribe. What came next he could not say, but he knew this was only the beginning. Daniel woke to the sound of soft voices outside his shelter. The tribe had given him a place to rest, a small hut woven from living vines and branches that glowed faintly in the night. It was not much, but it was safe and warm. As the morning light filtered through the canopy, he realized that every eye in the village was still on him. They accepted his presence for now, but their stares told him clearly that he had not yet earned their trust. Elira was already awake. She came to him carrying a bowl made from carved wood, filled with a strange fruit that glistened with dew. She offered it with a smile, and Daniel accepted it gratefully. The fruit tasted sweet and refreshing, better than his dry ration bars. He thanked her, though she did not understand the words, and she responded with a laugh that made him feel less like an outsider. Still, he noticed the way others in the tribe stood back, whispering among themselves. They were watching, waiting, testing him with their silence. Later that day, the leader of the tribe approached. She was tall and graceful, her markings brighter than the rest, and her eyes carried the weight of command. Her name, Daniel would later learn, was Serenia. She studied him for a long time before speaking. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority. Daniel could not understand her words, but Elira stood beside him, trying to translate with gestures. From her movements and expressions, he understood the message well enough. He was to be tested. Daniel did not resist. He knew this was the only way to show he was not a threat. The tribe wanted proof that he could live among them with respect. Serenia gestured for him to follow, and soon half the village walked with them through the forest. Their path wound through towering trees and across streams that sparkled in the sunlight. The journey itself felt like part of the test. The tribe moved with ease, but Daniel had to push himself to keep pace. Still, he did not complain. He walked with quiet determination, showing he was willing to learn their ways at last. They arrived at a clearing where the trees bent naturally to form an open circle. In the center stood a tall pillar of stone, marked with carvings that glowed faintly in patterns Daniel could not read. Around it, the women of the tribe gathered, watching him closely. Serenia spoke again, her voice rising with a sense of ceremony. Elira explained through gestures that this place was sacred. Any outsider who wished to be trusted had to prove their strength, not in battle but in spirit and respect. The first test was survival. Serenia handed him nothing but a simple knife made from stone and pointed toward the forest. Through Elira's motions, he understood what was asked of him. He was to find food and return before nightfall without relying on his human tools. Daniel nodded, taking the knife. It was not the same as his advanced equipment, but he knew how to adapt. The forest seemed even larger when he walked into it alone. He searched for edible plants, guided by what little Elira had shown him before. The fruit she had given him that morning grew high in certain trees, but climbing them was difficult. Still, Daniel forced himself upward, cutting vines and pulling himself to the branches. He gathered the fruit carefully, remembering how easily one could fall in this wild place. On his way down, he noticed animal tracks leading to a stream. With patience, he shaped a simple spear from a branch and waited. Hours passed, but at last he caught a small creature, enough to provide food. By the time he returned, the sun was dipping low. The tribe greeted his return with quiet surprise. He had the fruit in one hand and the animal in the other. Serenia studied him, then gave a small nod of approval. The people whispered, and Daniel sensed the tone had shifted. He had passed the first test, but the trials were not over. The second was endurance. The tribe led him to a river that cut through the forest, fast and deep. They signaled for him to cross it without aid. Daniel looked at the rushing water and took a deep breath. He was not the strongest swimmer, but he refused to show fear. He stepped into the current, letting the cold water pull against him. For every step forward, the river tried to push him back. He used his strength and focus, planting his feet against the stones below. At one point he slipped and the crowd gasped, but he caught himself, pushed harder, and finally reached the far side. He stood there soaked and tired, but victorious. When he crossed back, the tribe cheered softly. Even those who had doubted him were beginning to see something more. He was not just a stranger with strange tools. He was a man willing to fight against nature with nothing but his will. The final test came that evening. The tribe gathered around the sacred stone once more. Serenia placed before him a series of symbols drawn on the ground with glowing paint. They were patterns of the forest, signs of respect for the land and its spirits. Daniel was expected to copy them, to show that he honored their traditions. He knelt, watching carefully as Elira demonstrated. His hands were clumsy at first, but he worked with patience. Slowly, carefully, he traced the same patterns, repeating them until they matched. When he finished, the tribe fell silent. Serenia stepped forward and inspected his work. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke with a calm tone that carried approval. The people cheered, louder this time, their voices rising like music through the trees. Daniel felt the weight of the moment. He had walked into their sacred place as a stranger, but now he stood as someone accepted. He looked at Elira, who smiled with pride. Her eyes shone as if telling him he had done more than pass a test. He had become part of their story. That night the tribe held a gathering. Fires were lit, songs were sung, and dances filled the clearing. Daniel sat among them, listening to the rhythm of their voices. Though he did not understand the words, he felt the meaning in his heart. These people lived in harmony with their world, and they were offering him a place within it. For the first time since arriving on the planet, Daniel did not feel like an outsider. He felt like someone who belonged, and as the stars appeared above the glowing forest, he realized that what began as a simple act of saving one life had led him to something far greater. Humanity's strength was not only in machines or weapons. It was in courage, respect, and the willingness to walk beside others, even when they were different. Daniel looked around at the faces glowing in the firelight. He knew more challenges would come. Trust was not something that lasted without care, but tonight he was not alone. Tonight he was one of them. The forest was calm in the early morning, bathed in soft sunlight that filtered through the tall trees. Daniel woke feeling a quiet satisfaction. The previous days had tested him in ways he could not have imagined. He had saved Elira, survived a predator, and earned the trust of an entire tribe. Yet he knew that trust was only the beginning. It was fragile, something that needed care, respect, and patience. Elira appeared at the edge of his shelter carrying a small basket filled with fruits and nuts. She smiled warmly, a gesture Daniel had come to cherish. She gestured for him to follow, and together they walked toward the center of the settlement. Today was important. He had been told through gestures and expressions that the tribe had something to show him, something that would mark his acceptance in a more permanent way. As they arrived at the sacred clearing, Daniel noticed more members of the tribe gathered there than ever before. Women and children, elders and young warriors all stood in a circle. The air was filled with anticipation, a hum of energy that seemed to connect every living being in the forest. In the center of the circle stood Sirenia, the tribe's leader, her eyes bright and commanding. She held an object in her hands, a carved piece of wood shaped like a leaf, intricate patterns etched into its surface. Daniel watched closely, unsure of what this ritual meant. Elira stood beside him, placing her hand gently on his arm. Her eyes told him to be calm. He followed her lead, kneeling at the edge of the circle as Sirenia began to speak. Though he could not understand the words, the tone carried authority and warmth, signaling that what was about to happen was important. The carved leaf was handed to Daniel. He took it carefully, feeling its smooth texture. The markings seemed alive, as though they were part of the forest itself. Elira touched his hand briefly, then gestured for him to place the leaf at the center of the sacred stone. Daniel did so, kneeling and pressing it down with respect. As he did, a low hum spread through the clearing. The tribe's eyes followed him, watching his every movement. One by one, members of the tribe came forward. They touched the leaf with their hands, then touched Daniel's shoulder or back. Each gesture felt like a silent blessing, a sign that he was now part of their community. Daniel felt a warmth spread through him, not from the sun, but from the connection he shared with these people. He had come to a distant planet as a lone human explorer, and now he stood among them as something more, a friend, a protector, and a symbol of courage. Sirenia stepped closer and touched his shoulder firmly. Then she pointed to Elira and back to him, speaking quickly. Elira translated through gestures. The girl's life had been saved, and by doing so, Daniel had shown not only bravery but the human spirit of kindness. That spirit, the tribe understood, was something rare and worth honoring. The act of saving one life had created a bridge between two worlds. The celebration began soon after. Fires were lit in the clearing and soft music filled the air. The tribe played instruments made from wood, vines, and shells, creating melodies that seemed to flow naturally with the forest. Daniel watched as women and children danced gracefully, their movements mirroring the sway of the trees. The patterns of the dance, the rhythm of the music, and the warmth of the fire gave him a sense of belonging he had never known. Elira stayed close to him, showing him the ways of the celebration. She pointed to certain movements and encouraged him to try. Clumsy at first, Daniel followed her instructions, laughing as he stumbled. The tribe watched, some with smiles, some with quiet amusement. By the end of the song, Daniel had managed to perform the basic steps. A cheer rose from the tribe, not just for the dance, but for the human who had walked into their world and proven himself through action and heart. As night deepened, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Daniel and Alira near the sacred stone. The stars above shone bright and clear, the twin moons casting a silver light across the forest. Daniel sat down on a smooth rock, taking in the scene. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the battles, the tests, and the moments of connection. Humanity had spread among the stars, but this was a different kind of achievement. This was personal, meaningful, and lasting. Alira knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. She pointed at the forest, then at him, and made a gesture that suggested protection and partnership. Daniel understood instantly. He had not only protected her, but he now had a role in safeguarding this community. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that spoke without words, conveying trust, respect, and friendship. The next days were filled with learning and sharing. Daniel helped the tribe in small ways, using his human knowledge to improve their tools and traps without changing the natural balance of their world. He showed them how to build small bridges over streams, how to create shelters that could withstand storms, and how to use certain plants for medicine. In return, he learned their ways, how to move silently through the forest, how to understand the subtle signs of weather, and how to communicate with the creatures that shared the land. With each passing day, Daniel felt less like a visitor and more like a member of the tribe. The women and children looked to him not as a stranger, but as a protector and friend. Even Serenia, who had first tested him with quiet scrutiny, now spoke to him directly, teaching him about the history and values of her people. They shared stories around the fire, stories of courage, survival, and community. Daniel found himself inspired by their strength. Realizing that the lessons of the forest were as valuable as any he had learned from human science one evening. As the fire burned low, Daniel and Alira walked together to the edge of the forest. They looked out at the horizon, where the light of a distant city glimmered faintly in the distance. Daniel thought about the worlds he had visited, the people he had met, and the vastness of the universe. Yet in this moment he understood something crucial. Strength was not only about conquest or technology. True strength lay in compassion, respect, and the ability to connect with others no matter how different they were. Alira looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. She gestured toward the forest, then touched her heart and finally pointed to Daniel. The meaning was clear. He was now part of her people, and his actions would be remembered. Daniel felt a quiet pride, not of fame or glory, but of having made a real difference. In saving her life, he had not only earned trust but had created a lasting bond that transcended species and worlds. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel's presence became natural to the tribe. He shared in their work, their celebrations, and their quiet moments. He helped them explore new parts of the forest safely and learned about the creatures and plants that made the land unique. The tribe in turn taught him about their connection to the earth, the trees, and the water. Daniel realized that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt, to learn, and to respect life in all forms. One morning, Serenia called Daniel to the sacred stone once more. She handed him a carved symbol, more intricate than the leaf he had received before. It represented not only the tribe's trust but also their willingness to consider him as part of their legacy. He accepted it humbly, bowing his head in respect. The tribe surrounded him, their eyes filled with warmth and approval. Daniel understood that this was not just an honor, it was a responsibility. He would continue to protect, to learn, and to share in their journey. As night fell, Daniel looked around the glowing forest. Fires flickered in the settlement, music and laughter drifted on the wind, and the stars above shone like distant guides. He realized that the galaxy was vast, full of unknown dangers and wonders. Yet he also understood that humanity had a special place, not only in technology and discovery, but in courage, kindness, and the willingness to help others. By saving one life, he had opened a door to trust, friendship, and understanding that would last generations. Daniel sat quietly beside Alira, watching the flames dance. He knew that life on this planet would continue to challenge him, that dangers were still out there waiting, but he also knew that he was not alone. Together with Alira and the tribe, he had discovered something more profound than survival or exploration. He had discovered that the human spirit could create connection, inspire trust, and leave a legacy that stretched across worlds. The forest whispered around them. the trees bending slightly as if acknowledging the bond that had been formed. Daniel understood that this was only the beginning. His story on this world was not complete, but he had already made a mark. By choosing to save one life, he had touched many, and the lessons of trust, courage, and compassion would echo in the tribe long after his first footsteps in their forest. As the night deepened and the fires burned low, Daniel leaned back, feeling at peace. Humanity had a way of turning strangers into allies, challenges into opportunities, and acts of kindness into lasting change. He smiled, knowing that in saving Alira, he had not only changed her life but had discovered a new purpose, a new family, and a legacy that would endure.